Welcome to this lesson of the Polgar Chess University. In this first lesson, we are going to learn about the difference between check, checkmate, and stalemate. Another thing we're going to learn is how to checkmate with a queen up, having a king, queen versus a king. Well, the first position we see on the board, white has two different ways to checkmate. Try to figure it out. In the meantime, let me tell you about the difference between those three things I mentioned. When you are checking a king, for example, in this position, there are several ways to check the king. One is to move the queen to d5 in this case and create a check to black's king. It's only a check, which means the king is being attacked because the king has an escape. In this case, the only escape is for a black king to move to f8, a free square, or h8. That means it was not checkmate, not stalemate, but only a check. Remember that there may be other ways to react to a check than moving your king. Not in this case, but if, for example, black would have a bishop on b7, the square I highlighted with the green color, then that bishop could capture the queen. Well, in this case, we don't need to worry about that. Or for example, white has another check, moving the queen to c4. Another way to answer a check may be if an enemy piece can block it. For example, would black have a rook on e8, again the square that you can see with green on e8, then that rook potentially could move up to e6 in between the white queen and the black king. Again, black does not have any other piece in this case than his own king, therefore those options in this case are not there. But theoretically, remember, whenever your opponent tells you check and try to scare you and suggest that you better move your king, remember, it may not be your only option. In fact, oftentimes, if you are able to capture the piece that's giving a check, it may be the better move than moving your king. And don't forget about blocking a check either. Well, in this case, let's move on and let's see what is checkmate about. I hope by now you maybe figured out how to checkmate black's king. Well, one way is to move the queen to d8. As you can see, the white queen is attacking black's king on the 8th rank, and at the same time, white's king is helping by taking away the 3 squares highlighted with green from the black king to escape at. Therefore, this is checkmate because the black king has no free square to move to, and of course, it's a very important part of a checkmate being checkmate. There is no piece to block the check or capture white's queen. And there is another way to checkmate in this position, and that would be a very nice checkmate when all the 3 pieces are lined up on the same file by white's queen moving to g7, as you can see. And again, it's a checkmate because the white queen is controlling all the possible escape squares of the black king, and the white king is protecting the queen. Now that we saw how white could check in this position by moving the queen to either c4 or d5, we saw how the queen can checkmate by moving to g7 or d8. I'm going to show you how white can make a real big mistake. And that would be moving the queen to f6. Well, first of all, as you notice, this move does not directly attack black's king. And this would be a situation that we call stalemate. So, stalemate is a situation when the weaker side's king cannot move to any safe square. Yet, at the same time, the king is not being directly attacked. Well, what result does stalemate give? Well, stalemate ends the game in a draw, in a tie. Both sides would get half a point. Well, you bet, if you're white in this game and you're up a queen, that means you're very, very close to winning your game. And the last thing you'd want to happen, the game to end in a tie. You'd want to win, right? So therefore, this would be a blunder, a big mistake for white to make this move. This would result in stalemate and black escaping with scoring half a point instead of losing. So, again, just to recap, in this position, white can win immediately by giving checkmate. White could continue the game by giving checks, which are okay, not the best thing though, when you have a choice to checkmate. Or white can make some really bad move by making stalemate. Of course, it would also be really bad to give up your queen, because then the black king could capture the queen, as the queen was not protected by any other white piece, and then the game again would end in a draw because of insufficient mating material. That means that white has absolutely no way to give any checkmate with a king only. Okay, let's move on to the next position. And here we are. In this position, white again is up a queen, but as you can tell, black has an additional pawn on the a5 square. Now, imagine that it's black's turn in this position, not white's, but black's. Is this a stalemate? If you think it is, you're wrong. I didn't tell you another condition for a position to be stalemate. It's not only about the king not being able to move, but any other pieces. So therefore, if black in this case has a pawn even or any other piece that can move, then of course the game continues, and in this case black could and would have to, because it's its only legal move, push its pawn from a5 to a4, and then the game continues. So therefore, the answer is this position is not a stalemate. White is in a winning position. In the meantime, black has possibilities to move his pawn. And let's see the next position. When there are more pieces on the board, white not only has the king and the queen, but an additional rook as well. The question is this a checkmate, a check, or a stalemate, or none of them? Well, hopefully you figured out that the black king is under attack. That certainly means that it's either a check or a checkmate. It's definitely not a stalemate or just a regular position. So black needs to see if he has an escape from this attack. And you'll again notice that black has two safe squares to go to, e3 or e5, and therefore this is not a checkmate, but only a check to black's king. Of course, white is in a winning position by having an extra queen and rook, but it's not yet checkmate. In this next position, again the question is, what is this? Is it check, checkmate, stalemate, or none of them? Well, the first question to look for is whether the black king is under attack or not. If you look carefully, you'll notice that the black king is not under any kind of attack. Therefore, it's surely not a check or not a checkmate. May it be a stalemate? Well, certainly it could only be a stalemate if it were black to move. And it is black to move. If it was white to move, white could checkmate in various ways. For example, moving the queen to c8 or moving the queen to e7. Both would result in immediate checkmate. But here really the question is whether this is a checkmate, a stalemate, a check, or none of them. And here the correct answer is it's none of them, because the black king has a legal move by moving the king to f8. So therefore, it's not a stalemate, the game continues, and white is about to win. And let's move on to another example. And here we are. In this case, white has a queen and a knight, while black only has the lone king. Again, the question is, try to figure out, black being on move, is black in check, checkmate, stalemate, or none of them? Again, if it's white to move, white would win easily, could even checkmate in one move by moving the queen to h7. But it is not white's turn, it is black's turn. And if you look carefully, the knight on f6 is taking away black's escape square on g8, and therefore the black king is stalemated. And remember, black has no other pieces, no pawn, no bishop, no other piece whatsoever, and therefore this is a stalemate. Black got lucky to escape with a draw. We're moving on to the next position. And here white does not have a queen, but still white has a winning material advantage, having a rook and a bishop. Again, the question is the black king in check, checkmate, or stalemate, or none of them? Well, what do you think? Well, if you think you're in checkmate, you're wrong. Look again. Black has an escape square on f8. The king can move out of it. That means that the starting position was a check. A check means you need to react to it. You cannot just make any other move. Of course, in this very case, very position, black has no other legal move anyway. But it's always important that you realize when you're in check. So after learning and understanding the difference between check, checkmate, and stalemate, now we're going to learn how to win a game when you're ahead a whole entire queen, just like in the position we see here. But unlike in the first positions that we saw, white is not ready to checkmate. It's true that the black king is all the way down on the 8th rank, which is a good thing, but the white king is far away from helping the queen. And as you're going to learn in a next couple of minutes, without the king's help, or at least one other piece helping the queen, it's impossible to checkmate a lone king. Well, as I said, white already achieved quite a bit by the fact that the black king is on the 8th rank and simply the edge of the board, that the fact that there is no 9th rank limits the king's mobility. So in this case, White's first plan has to be to make sure that that black king will stay on the 8th rank while White brings the king to help and get ready to checkmate. Can you think what should be the first move? Well, the first move should be moving the queen to A7. As you can see, this cuts the black king off the 7th rank, and the king cannot cross that line where you see the yellow arrow. Now, the black king is forced to stay on the 8th rank and move into either side. In the meantime, the white king now is free to walk up and give support to the queen. It's important to notice that white is not giving checks. A mistake a lot of beginners try to do, that they try to keep checking the king, while in the meantime, the goal is not to keep giving checks, but the goal is to checkmate the king. And as we said, the only way that can be accomplished is if the king and the queen work together. So here, this is already the last stage. The black king is down at the edge of the board in the 8th rank. White is ready to bring the king to help. By the way, another important rule to remember, the only place that a lone king can be checkmated is the edge of the board. Let it be the 8th rank, the H file, the 1st rank, or the A file. What's common between all these squares along those files and ranks is that they are all near the border of the chessboard, at the edge of the board. So therefore, the fact that there is no file 0 or 9th file or I file or any file lower than A, that limits the king's escape. So let's see how white should continue here. By moving the king to F2, black can do nothing but keep moving back and forth his king somewhere along the 8th rank, and the white king is moving up. The white king pretty much wants to stay around or at the same file as the black king does. So the king simply keeps moving up and up and up. And then finally, when the white king reaches the 6th rank, the white queen stays along the 7th rank all along, and the black king is stuck on the 8th rank. Then we're ready to checkmate by moving the queen to E7. Okay, so this was relatively easy because the black king was already there. But let's see what can we do in situations when the black king is not there. The black king, in fact, is right in the middle of the board. How will we force that king to get to the edge of the board? Because voluntarily, if it would have a choice, it would not go there. By the way, remember that if you're on the defensive side, which hopefully you won't be too often, but who knows, it may happen time to time, try to stay in the middle of the board and don't walk to the 8th rank or 1st rank or A file or H file. There are, of course, many ways to win in a position like this, but I like the method that's called the squeezing or the following method. What we'll see now is the game plan for white being the following. First step is the white queen will take away space from the black king slowly but surely, limiting the black king's mobility. After that, we make sure, as a second step, that the black king will be forced to stay at the edge of the board, as we have seen in the last example. And then step number 3, we are bringing the king to help. And finally, step number 4, we checkmate. Well, we can accomplish that in various ways from this position. One of them is to play queen b4. Now, you can notice this interesting relationship between the white queen and the black king. The distance between those two pieces is as if a knight would keep giving check to the black king. If the queen on b4 would be a knight, that would be a check to black's king. Now, let's suppose the black king wants to remain in the middle of the board. Then again, we're not giving any checks. Neither are we bringing the king. As I said, there are other winning methods too, but I think this is the most systematic one, the easiest to remember. We follow the king without any checks, simply taking away, limiting more and more squares from the black king. As you can see, those yellow arrows, the queen in both of those directions doesn't let the king escape through any of those squares. For example, the king moves to d6. We follow the black king, again limiting it to a smaller area. For example, king e6. We follow queen c5. Let's say comes king f6. I bet you know the answer. Yes, indeed, it's queen d5. As you can see, the squares controlled by the white queen are more and more limiting black's king. For example, king e7 and queen c6. The area is getting smaller and smaller in which the black king is stuck at. King f7 and queen d6. King g7 and queen e6. And king h7. Step number 1, goal number 1 has been accomplished. The black king is at the edge of the board. Now, step number 2, we want to make sure the king is staying there. As we said, we don't care whether that king is on the H file, where it is right now, or it's stuck on the 8th rank as it was in the previous position. So therefore, what's the move that keeps the king on the H file? I'll have a hint for you. If a king is on the H file, it means you want your queen to be on the G file. Of course, I did not mean here, where the king would simply capture the queen. What I meant is not to lose our queen, but to make sure that the black king will stay on H7 or at least somewhere along the H file. Now the black king, let's say, moves to the corner to H8. One thing is extremely important to remember, that when we're getting into the habit of squeezing the king towards a more and more limited space, the last thing we want to do is to take away all its space, meaning stalemating the king. This would be a big mistake for white to move the queen on g6, where you see it right now. This would end the game immediately in a draw, in a stalemate. However, we're ready for step number 3. The black king is cut from the rest of the board, stuck on the H file. Our queen is on the G file, making sure it stays there. And now step number 3 is, if you thought bringing your king to help, you were completely right. And that's exactly what we want to do. And where would we like to see our king? We want to see our king in one of the following 3 squares, either f8, f7, or of course f6, which is actually the closest to our king right now. So our best strategy now is to move our king up along the long diagonal along the yellow arrow that you can see. Step number 1, king b2. As you can see, black doesn't have many options but move his king back and forth along the h file. King d4 and king e5 and king f6, and finally we are ready to checkmate by queen g7. Well, I hope you learned. You learned about what's the difference between check, checkmate, and stalemate. And you learned the method how to win when you have a king-queen versus a lone king. Hope you enjoyed this lesson, and we'll be back next week. Until then, so long.